So today we're talking to Amaya Gillespie. She's a former director in the UN with experience in pandemics and other areas. And she's going to be talking to us about leading through uncertainty from her perspective now as doing some career coaching and obviously in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. So Amaya, thanks for being here with us. And I'm thinking we could start out talking about the overarching principles for a leader, what a leader needs to be doing and thinking in a time of crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think some of the key things that I'm hearing, and as a coach, and most of my clients now are actually in the international development world. I used to have people asking all the time, the most common thing people would ask about was conflict in the workplace, how to manage, so-called difficult people or colleagues, and how could they build their skills, get better at it. All that's gone away. Nobody is asking me about that right now. Everyone's asking, how do you manage when everything's so uncertain or ambiguous, and it just there's a whole lot of complexity around things, lots of layers. So there is, the good news is that there is research out there. We have experience to build on, and particularly from Ebola, but also other pandemics that we've all almost forgotten are pandemics, like HIV, where we know that certain things are super important. And I do think that most people have a sense of what they can be doing, but maybe what I'm going to say is really just going to reassure people, and I guess that would be my intent. And the first thing I'd say is that there's no one right way to do this. And that really is quite confronting for traditional leadership styles, where you're used to having a goal in front of you and then you march in a very rational way towards it, taking steps based on evidence, etc. We don't have that sort of certainty, and we're unlikely to have it actually for some time. And we should expect that this sort of environment we're in now with COVID-19 will recur from time to time. And in fact, there are several examples of other pandemics like this, and the countries that have had experience with this before have actually tended to do better, countries like Singapore, South Korea, etc. So the thing is, there's not one right way, but there are some principles to move forward with. And the main one is that you want to be looking at multiple scenarios, preferably at the same time. And you can actually be using quite short time frames, little pilot cycles, if you want to call them that, little testing cycles where you run an idea, dip your toe in the water for a short amount of time, monitor it very closely, adjust, and then come back around and iterate. So this process of iteration, but short timelines. And we have been experiencing that in effect when you think about with COVID-19, every day, every week certainly, but every day, sometimes hourly, the conditions, the advice is changing because we don't know all of the information. We know some of it. So it's very much a trial and error mentality. And I guess the second thing I'd say is, because you don't have all the information and because there's new information coming all the time, people can often be distracted by that and a little paralyzed. We all know very, very well now that there is a huge cost to doing nothing or relying on the ways that we've always done things. So there is a need to try things. We can try this trial and error, short timeframes, adjust so it's this so that the failures that we might have are not enormous and expensive, but you can adjust quickly to the new environment or the new information. But it's also important to focus on the core of what you know, rather than being distracted or paralyzed by all these new uncertainties that pop up. Or things like, for example, with COVID, the mask situation, where in the beginning, people were saying, wear a mask, then don't wear a mask, it doesn't work that well. And then wear a mask, really important, wear a mask. So it's very very important for a leader to maybe not rule out things with such, great authority in the beginning, because you don't know what you're going to need later. So it's important to say things like, we're not recommending that right now. We don't have enough information about that just yet. Yet is a really good word to be using in uncertainty too. So you want to focus on what we do know, social distancing. That's what we have. Maybe it doesn't feel like such a sharp tool at the moment, but that's what we have. So this idea, stay with what you know and what appears to be the main driver of the issue rather than being distracted. And I just say, in addition, it helps a lot to decentralize decisions, resources in these times of uncertainty, because the situation in an individual locality, whether it's a household, a community, a business, can be quite different to what someone sitting centrally is suggesting. And that can be the source of an awful lot of rumours and misunderstandings, and ultimately can also undermine the trust that you might have. So there does need to be a core moving forward that you stick to. But you do need that flexibility of having decentralised decisions and people being able to use their own initiative in some way to be able to address what they see in their immediate environment. And I guess ultimately all of that requires an environment of feeling safe to fail. Because with trial and error, it's built in. There is going to be failure. It's not something in the UN that we don't have much tolerance for it, even though we talk about it. But maybe this is one of the things that will really stick from this global experience of COVID, that actually we are going to have failings. It won't be perfect, but we need to move forward and have this kind of have an approach that allows and actually expects that things won't be perfect, but that people are just trying things, and that's a good thing in this environment of uncertainty.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think that all of that is really important on that macro and micro level, that you've got the world leaders who are making decisions, and then you have the everyday manager who's trying to lead their team through uncertainty. You have the parent who's trying to lead their kids through uncertainty, and you can kind of use these principles in any number of those scenarios. So that's really helpful. It does take being very conscious of what you're doing and being very purposeful and taking a step back at a time that's already hard to do that. What do people need to hear from their leader, do you think? What are the main
Well, of course, again, there's a lot of research and experience, direct experience, tells us these things. We sort of know it at our core, but humans are also quite complex creatures, and we don't necessarily do what is rational, or there are several versions of what feels rational when we are in situations of uncertainty and ambiguity. We start to revert sometimes to things that we know or feel safe, which may or may not be so helpful. So a couple of things. Firstly, the first thing I would say is that, so you've got this leader who's going to acknowledge that I don't have all the answers, right? Already that can feel a little uncomfortable for leaders who are used to having the most experience, being the smartest guy in the room or whatever. So even for the leader themselves, they also need to apply some of this to themselves. The first thing I would say is that empathy is super important. And what does that look like in uncertainty in these sort of situations? It's simple stuff. Acknowledge the disruption. Acknowledge that things won't be perfect. That our video calls might be interrupted by the family popping in and having a cameo role. These things are going to happen. I think the other thing is to really focus on the collective rather than the individual. Now, we have certainly, many of us around the world have seen how communities, societies have become much more individual focused. Now, of course, a lot of traditional cultures still maintains this idea of collective, and you actually do see some cultures, some countries who have who immediately are working much better together because they've had a greater sense of that collective. Super important, not only in a national sense, but also in your own office environment, that we're now working together truly in teams. This idea of an environment that's safe to fail, you can see it becomes very important, because you'll be discussing things with each other, really asking to bounce ideas off each other, because you truly don't know whether this new idea is going to work. So you really need people to come with you, to have this sort of no regrets kind of policy. We're going to try this, we don't know, but we're going to monitor it closely and we're going to adjust if it doesn't seem to be working for us. So also you're asking yourself very simple questions too. So again, not to be drawn into the complexity of it all. Simple questions like, is what we're doing moving us closer or away from our goal? Rather than there's a million factors here and all of them have to be perfect, which again can be paralyzing. Is what we're doing, is this what needs to happen now? Simple question. Could this happen later? Is this something that we need to do now, or is someone else doing it? And I think that's a kind of that's quite an important question right now, because I feel like a number of organisations are trying to pivot to become COVID-19 experts. Again, related to what I said earlier about sticking with your core, I don't think everyone suddenly becoming COVID connected in a delivery way is useful. It will backfire as we come out of this, and we will come out of this, but it's also just not going to serve any goal that you have. It's not the core of what you do. So these questions of is this what we need to do right now? Are others doing it? Could it be done later? Sure, connect to the pieces that are relevant. COVID-19 is super relevant to pregnant women right now, to delivering a healthy baby within a health service. That is a super relevant thing right now, because it's difficult for people to move around, there's fear, etc. So yes, connections, but no, not total pivots that I feel like some people are wondering whether we should all be doing this right now. I think the main thing here is we're really sort of making meaning of the situation too, and that is sometimes timeframes. So you're saying, like, this is what we're doing for now, and now means the next month or the next week. Be ready for change. Making meaning in other ways, like for actual programming, when you think about what we're trying to do with COVID and other pandemics, this idea of collective, the collective working together, then you're really saying to people that the life you save might not be your own. Similarly, in a workplace, the success that you see might not be your own in terms of your corner of the strategic plan. It might be helping someone else right now. So I think empathy is super important. And I'm also touching here on, there's a huge number of behavioural lessons here. But again, just in short, I think most people have a sense of it, even if you're not deeply embedded in the behavioural economics of it. But the key thing is trust. If you want people to change behaviour, to come with you, you need to have trust. Now, trust is something that if you didn't have it before the crisis, it's going to be really difficult to generate some during a crisis. So that said, there are other key things around managing through crisis to pay attention to, and COVID-19 has really made it crystal clear, but it's relevant to a whole range of other issues. And just to pick a couple, like there are themes, I guess, in behavioural science where you're always looking at these to see how you can manage these during a crisis or make sure they don't get out of hand. One of them, scarcity. We've seen that one. Social proof. Sometimes we talk about it as social norms. and a sense of control, if we just talk about those three. So I think most people can see things that you might do that would make those three things worse, make people feel more scarcity, to show people social proof of things that are not useful right now, or to show people that they don't have a sense of control. I think it's quite obvious for people that the things that we might do that make it worse. Similarly, I think people know what makes these things better, or at least know not to do some things because it will make it worse. So we've seen at the beginning of many epidemics and pandemics, people being told very severe messages, often fatalistic. And that feeds a kind of scarcity model. It's like, this is terrible. There's nothing to do about it. It's every man for himself. And you can see that, again, you've got people back in individual mode. Social proof. If the leader is not wearing the face mask, that says a lot about what other people will and should do, for example. And this idea of a sense of control, it's always super important to think about, again, a simple phrase when everything's going wild. What do you want people to know and to do? So you don't actually want to tell people everything you know about COVID-19 or HIV or Ebola if you're the epidemiologist or the public health expert. You want to tell them what will be useful to get the behaviour change that you're looking for. What do you want them to do is super important, because it's not that you never deliver bad news. Sure, you want people to be informed. But if you do give certain information, make sure you let people know what they can do. Because when people have that type of information, it makes them feel more control, even if it's simple, like social distancing. And I guess ultimately for a leader, it's important to acknowledge that during a crisis often forces us to innovate in ways that we could have or we should have much earlier. So sometimes it's just fast forwarding things that we already knew.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what you said, actually, I think can be applied in a time of tranquility and not uncertainty and crisis. It's a lot of the same things you should be doing. So maybe that is a silver lining, that if we start doing this now and it actually takes a long time, then maybe it's some good practices that are set into place. I also think that it's really good for people to hear almost what they can be expecting from their leaders, and how they can be as themselves as well, and seeing some of the value of what the WHO has been able to do in simplifying that messaging. Wash your hands, keep a distance. It is actually very simple. It's been pretty simplified for people, so that's good.
Yeah.
Along the work life, we were talking about the workplace, and what are your thoughts right now about this balance that people are trying to strike, and the best way to go about it? Or do you have any lifelines to throw out there?
Yeah, well, again, this is a classic that we've been talking about for years. Work-life balance, work-life balance. I think it's pretty obvious right now that it's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. As I said before, when your dog barks in the background or a bird flies through your video conference, this is how it is. So I think this does all link back to this idea that it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy, particularly in the beginning of these crisis situations. But I think people do go through these periods of like settling in, and then there's a change. So there's a little fever pitch at times, and then we settle in as each of these changes go. And as we go along, people generally tend to adapt better. So I do think that's important for a leader to know, that, and all of us, that we should expect things to be a little uncomfortable, people to be maybe a little edgy, maybe responding in different new ways than you're used to early in a crisis. But we should both expect and believe that we will all each manage, and there will be these little up and down cycles as we go through. But of course, all of that's not to say that there won't be people who maybe find it more difficult or are in situations that are much more difficult than others. So there will need to be ways to manage and to connect and understand what's going on. And having said that, that is one of the things that is super important right now with everyone being remote. And I do think this is something that's going to stick. There's going to be a lot more of working remotely. In the past, we would talk about, oh, it's fine to work remote, you can work from home. But then, the boss would say, oh, no, you need to be in the office all the time. I think that's going to shift. I think we won't be traveling as much. I think there's a whole lot of things about our previous life that, sometimes it was a bit of a relief to, and people kind of like to travel, some people in particular. So I think that's going to really change the dynamics for people as well. Also with this, with the having fewer options for communication, there is a need to actually over communicate in a sense. That's probably not the right term, because it's not that you want to duplicate or have people sitting in front of screens constantly, but you do want to check, because from a screen you don't get all the non-verbals, the energy, the dynamic necessarily that you get when you're sitting in a room or looking down a hallway, seeing people talking. You don't get that. So it is literally isolating. So you need to have other measures in place. And it's super important to have, little surveys. A number of people, I know a number of offices have, coffee mornings and things like that. But some of that can feel a little forced. It is important to have multiple communication channels. It's not possible to be on a screen all day long, and people can just pick up the phone, just use audio, don't use the screen, walk and talk, have walking meetings, that sort of trying to create a little bit of diversity, a bit of variety for people is going to be important, because work and life is integrated right now. And I guess for the future, in terms of things, I think other things that I think will stick, in a system sense, in terms of where would I put my money, say, for adjusting to this new way of working. I think it is super important to put it around, probably it'll be technologies, but this idea of being able to monitor in real time and get feedback from your staff, for your immediate business environment, but also from your programming as you're delivering, to be able to get immediate feedback and to be able to segment it by different places, geographically, or different types of clients or programs that you have, or different parts of your goal or your outcomes or your targets. I think that's where we should be much better, and I think that's an example of something we could have and should have done much sooner. But I think now it's going to be super important for us to have those things moving forward.
Okay, great. Yeah, so kind of, if I heard you correctly, kind of digitizing the social cues that you're not picking up on because everybody's isolated in some way, and then using big data, all the data that already exists, to really analyze and dig deep into the places that we can't go on a field visit to.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these thoughts. And you always seem to remain above the fray, even though COVID-19 is in your community. But you seem cool, calm, and collected as usual. And I think this will be really useful to the people who watch it. So thank you very much.
I hope so. Thank you.